I'm making this door and the hardware from scratch in 1/12 scale. I'm using 1/8 inch thick basswood to make my door, and I started by drawing a pattern and cutting out the panels. I'm lightly sanding the inside of the cutouts at a slight angle to make it look like trim. The front piece will have a piece layered behind it to make it look like a paneled door, but I need to cut out these sections for some glass. I'm using trash plastic for the glass. Super glue can make plastic foggy, so I'm adding mine with Fabri-Tac glue. The plastic glass in the door is sandwiched between the wooden piece in the back and the piece in the front. I'm making the pieces I cut out of the door earlier look like panels. I'm cutting the edges off and sanding them at an angle. This isn't remotely correct for the way you would actually assemble a door like this, but I think it gives a pretty convincing antique paneled door design. I'm protecting my faux plastic glass while I round one edge of the door. I started by removing a lot of the bulk with a blade and finished by sanding. Rounding off the side that's the opposite of the door handle will allow this to easily open and close without catching on the inner trim. After giving the door a coat of paint, I cut some trim for the surround. Rather than using hinges, I'm using a simple pin method to make this door function. I drilled a hole at the top and bottom on one side of the door and used a paper clip going through the pieces of wood to make the door swing shut. For the walls, I'm using some foam core. I cut the opening slightly too small so the door frame will fit nicely. I came up with a solution for beefing up the small trim I have. To make my small trim look more substantial, I'm adding some strips of matboard. Matboard is a thick paper product you see framing photos and art. I hid the gap between the paper and wood trim using some spackle before sanding and painting. The door has been painted, so I'm removing the masking tape so I can add texture to this faux glass. I'm adding texture with Dimensional Magic, but you could also use diamond glaze. This stuff is pretty liquid right out of the bottle, so I'm using a stiff brush and a pouncing motion to create an orange peel texture. I'm using tiny quarter round trim from Earth and Tree Miniatures to finish the inside of the window, and I did fill the gaps before painting. Now my favorite part. I'm using an oatmeal lid that can't be recycled to make a door lock. I started by cutting out a rectangle and cut 2 of the corners off. I'm creating some teeth on the other end. These little plastic pieces glued to a rectangle is what the teeth will latch onto. I cut 3 layers of plastic oatmeal lid for the toothy part of the lock, and now I'm adding a small ridge around the edge using some wood glue. This creates a subtle texture on the surface that gives an etched or engraved quality, like vintage locks. I measured on a real door where this type of lock hits and removed a small piece for the rectangle. I temporarily stuck the 2 pieces together so I could glue each piece in place in the right position. I'm adding a peephole to the door by drilling a small hole to prevent splitting the wood and then using a larger bit. My peephole is actually a grommet you would find in a tape wire kit for dollhouse lighting. I'm just mimicking the Spider-Man door, so I'm not entirely sure what this is, but I cut the head off of a sewing pin, added some resin on the bottom, and made a tiny gold knob. I've been attaching all of the hardware pieces with wood glue. Now I'm making some metal hardware using an aluminum baking lid. I made an indent with a ball stylus, flipped it over, cut a line down the middle, and now I'm rounding out the edges. This rectangular portion is the part that a sliding lock would fit into. I glued the rectangles on either side of the door and cut a piece of chain to length. I attached the chain with some Fabri-Tac glue. I took a closer look at this vintage lock at the bottom and added a couple more components. The black is some paper representing the latch, and I added a small bead as a knob. It's a good idea to keep double checking your reference images so you don't forget details. I still need to make the doorknob, but I'm quickly aging the door by watering down some brown paint and adding a bit of black. I'm brushing this paint wash over the surface and removing it quickly so it doesn't remove the paint from my plastic and metal components. Now I'm making a doorknob backplate using some matboard. The door plate is too thick for 1/12 scale, so I'm removing some layers of the matboard. I poked a little hole and now I'm cutting a tiny keyhole. You can get matboard scraps for free from Michaels. You can paint this backplate to look like metal, but I had to copy my reference image. For the doorknob, I glued this plastic bead to the end of a toothpick. I cut off the tip and sanded the end flat so it looks more like a doorknob and less like a domed bead. Once the glue was set, I removed some of the thickness from the toothpick so it's more in scale. I painted the entire doorknob with black enamel paint so it's nice and shiny. You could also use nail polish or add a shiny top coat. Join my Patreon as either a free member or as a paying member for $3 a month, and check out this video next to see the rest of this project.